The sickening smell of salted, stripped human skin rises from the sword belt of William Wallace. The rebel commander wears the flayed hide of a hated English sheriff as a deliberate provocation, not a mere battle trophy. The longbow is about to be tested in massed combat for the first time on a European battlefield. Edward marches north with 15,000 soldiers, determined to answer this insult with overwhelming force. What unfolds on this bloody Scottish hillside will change the mechanics of medieval warfare forever. But first, Wallace must choose his ground, and he has made his decision. An entire medieval empire relocates its bureaucratic heart just to crush a single northern rebellion. King Edward I moves the courts of King's Bench and the Exchequer to York, transforming a northern city into a massive military administrative center. This structural force channels thousands of armored heavy cavalry and paid Welsh mercenaries toward the Scottish border. The sheer weight of English logistical planning creates an existential threat that mathematically outmatches any local uprising. This total mobilization of royal administrative power seals the fate of the Scottish lowlands before a single blade is drawn. The spark of open national rebellion ignites with the assassination of the English sheriff of Clydesdale. Wallace understands what no Scottish noble has dared to admit. English heavy cavalry cannot be outrun, only absorbed into a killing ground. He has led a savage winter raid deep into Northumberland, forcing rigid conscription across the fractured Scottish districts. Many of his own spearmen have never held a weapon before this month. Common men with sharpened iron poles are about to face the finest mounted knights in Christendom. The rebel guardian stakes everything on the geometry of a single battlefield, watching the horizon for the first sign of dust. A sudden shipment of wine triggers a drunken, bloody riot among the starving Welsh infantry. King Edward I, a cold and ruthlessly efficient feudal administrator, steps forward to restore iron order through immediate lethal force. Having recently concluded a truce in Flanders, he personally leads this massive punitive campaign despite failing seaborne supply ships and rampant hunger. His heavy horsemen ruthlessly ride down their own mutinous foot soldiers to preserve the army's advance. This cold display of absolute royal willpower forces the fractured invasion force back into a steady, relentless march westward. The English barons expect a rabble of commoners to scatter instantly like frightened cattle at the first sound of thundering hooves. Edward assumes a direct heavy cavalry charge will immediately shatter the rebel lines. He does not realize Wallace is a charismatic leader of guerrilla insurgencies who has meticulously prepared a defensive network. Yet, the rebel guardian severely struggles to coordinate divided noble factions under intense tactical pressure. As the morning mist clears over the valley of Glenburn, the fatal assumptions of both commanders are set to collide. The moment of irreversible commitment arrives on a bare patch of ground outside Linlithgow. Edward receives vital intelligence from divided Scottish nobles and orders an immediate march to meet the enemy, ignoring his own severe injuries from a startled warhorse. His broken ribs scream in agony as he mounts his destrier at dawn to lead the vanguard. The king completely abandons his planned retreat to Edinburgh, choosing immediate confrontation over logistical safety. This sudden tactical pivot forces 15,000 English soldiers into a rapid, unyielding advance toward the Callander Hills, a wide, boggy marshland formed by the silt-laden drainage of the Glenburn guards the foot of the hillock. The Scottish spearmen stand ready on the hard ground above this treacherous, muddy loch. Wallace designed this natural barrier to neutralize the immense speed and crushing weight of the English heavy cavalry. The terrain itself becomes a physical extension of the Scottish defense, an impassable zone of deep muck meant to swallow the pride of England's knighthood. The advancing barons stare across the deceptive basin, waiting for the signal to charge. 4 massive circular defensive arrays dominate the northern slope in a terrifyingly rigid display. Each Schiltron formation resembles a dense, impenetrable wood of overlapping 12-foot ash pikes driven firmly into the earth. Ropes and wooden stakes bind the perimeters together, creating an unyielding shield wall of iron-tipped wood. Between these massive circles, the men of Bute brace their traditional wooden shortbows, while a small reserve of noble knights waits silently in the rear. This meticulous infantry arrangement presents a seemingly unbreakable wall to the approaching English vanguard. A chaotic thunder of hooves signals the premature charge of the impatient English knights. The Earl Marshal's column plunges headlong into the soft, deep silt of the hidden marshland, throwing horses and heavily armored riders into complete disorder. Yet the grand Scottish defensive plan collapses when John Redcommen's noble cavalry suddenly turns and flees the field without striking a single blow. This catastrophic betrayal leaves the vulnerable Scottish flanks entirely exposed to the recovering English wings. Sir John Stuart's brave archers are left standing completely alone in the gaps. The Battle of Falkirk, 1298, shifts irrevocably into a secondary, far more brutal phase as the initial cavalry breakthrough fails. King Edward I rides to the front and commands his impetuous knights to fall back from the unbreakable spear wall. The promised destruction of the rebel infantry is now violently in motion, though the precise mechanism of their defeat remains hidden behind the lines. The English heavy horsemen give way, leaving a tense, ringing silence across the blood-soaked field. Now, the king unleashes his secret tactical weapon. Thousands of veteran Welsh mercenaries and English archers step forward to form a continuous deadly line. They begin to rain a concentrated, high-angle missile barrage of heavy war arrows directly into the dense, immobile masses of the Scottish ranks. Steel-tipped bodkin points puncture chainmail, leather jerkins, and bone with absolute ease at a range of 100 yards. The static infantry circles have no shields and no means of counterattacking at range. This relentless rain of steel systematically dismantles the physical integrity of the defensive formations. The Scottish spearmen expect a chance to fight hand-to-hand, but they face only an uninterrupted aerial slaughter. They are completely pinned in place, brutally pelted with large stones from English slingers, alongside the devastating archery barrage. Gaps rapidly open in the tightly packed perimeters as hundreds of men are killed or horribly mutilated. The physical and psychological endurance of the defenders reaches its absolute breaking point under this one-sided assault. The interlocking forest of 12-foot ash pikes begins to thin and sway as panic spreads. A massive two-handed claymore cleaves through the air as the rebel leader desperately tries to hold his fracturing lines together. William Wallace maintains his position on the bloody hillside, even as his closest lieutenant, Sir John de Graham, falls mortally wounded beside him. The English king watches from a distance, calmly exploiting the static structural weakness he had identified. Wallace's early belief in the total invincibility of his defensive circles is completely shattered by this tactical reality. The grim determination of the remaining spearmen is the only thing delaying the inevitable. The final, irreversible collapse begins the moment King Edward unleashes his rested heavy cavalry for a second charge. The English knights surge with devastating force directly into the massive gaps torn open by the relentless archery barrage. This time, the fractured perimeters offer no resistance against the weight of the charging warhorses. The rigid Schiltron formation dissolves into a chaotic, bloody slaughterhouse as the defensive circles completely break apart. The dramatic defiance of the commoners is violently resolved as the entire Scottish line disintegrates into wild panic. Perhaps a third of the entire Scottish force lies dead or dying across the blood-slicked hills of Callander. The proud men of Bute are completely annihilated, lying in heaps around the body of their fallen commander, Sir John Stuart. Macduff of Fife and hundreds of landless commoners fill the red trenches, their bodies trampled beyond recognition by fleeing survivors and pursuing cavalry. The silence that follows the roar of battle is broken only by the low groans of the wounded. Wallace faces a perilous retreat with a tiny remnant of his inner circle. The broken remnants of the rebel army scatter in wild flight into the dense, protective forests of the Torwood. Wallace escapes across a low-tide crossing known as Brian's Ford, where he turns to slay the pursuing master of the English Templars, Sir Brian le Jay. His own warhorse, heavily wounded by arrows, collapses into the freezing mud of the River Carron, forcing the Guardian to continue his flight on foot. This physical breakdown of the command structure mirrors the total military and psychological disintegration of the rebellion. The Scottish nobility expects a swift recovery, but the catastrophic defeat utterly ruins Wallace's military reputation. Wallace publicly surrenders his ceremonial authority as Guardian of Scotland in a secluded winter camp. This sudden resignation leaves an immense political vacuum, quickly filled by the bitter, escalating rivalry between Robert the Bruce and John Red Comyn. The entire cause of Scottish independence fractures along dynastic fault lines, leaving the kingdom completely exposed to the Crown's next move. A dark shadow falls over the leaderless northern realm. How can an army of ordinary foot soldiers ever survive when facing the devastating evolution of ranged missile superiority on an open battlefield? The bloody fields of Falkirk demonstrate that courage and long pikes are no longer enough to guarantee victory against a disciplined, combined arms system. This tactical failure forces military minds across Europe to completely rethink the relationship between heavy cavalry, missile troops, and stationary infantry. The age of static defensive circles holding the line against royal armies has reached its violent end. But the Schiltron itself is not dead. It is about to evolve into something more dangerous. Would the shattered remnants of the Scottish resistance learn to adapt their defensive structures before the English crown permanently subjugates their homeland? They study the broken iron tips and shattered shafts left behind in the northern forests to understand their structural failure. They recognize that to survive the Longbow, the traditional Schiltron formation must undergo a radical, highly sophisticated transformation. The tactical blueprint for a future, even more decisive collision is already being forged in the shadows of the northern wilderness. The tragic legacy of Falkirk ultimately provides the necessary tactical evolution for Scotland's ultimate liberation 16 years later. Robert the Bruce refines Wallace's crude circles, training his spearmen to move offensively while utilizing restrictive terrain to completely neutralize English archery. Betrayed by a scheming Scottish nobleman to the English crown, Wallace is captured near Glasgow and brutally executed in London, ending all organized Scottish resistance forever. The ongoing war now flows directly toward the bloody marshlands of the next great campaign, the fords and bogs where everything will be decided. This enduring struggle sets the stage for the historic Battle of Bannockburn in June 1314. The road from Falkirk leads directly to the marshy banks of the Bannockburn, and a massive clash that will redefine Scottish sovereignty. Subscribe to stay with this historical series as the next major engagement is already moving into active production. If you are watching on a television screen, use the QR code visible now to open the subscription page on your phone.